Hello everyone, welcome to today's episode of Velocity Kinetics. I've just realised my hair looks like I've been dragged through a hedge backwards. So today, what am I talking about? Aside from nonsense, as some people might think. Talking about some surprises that have happened over this weekend. And not the sort of, oh, is there a pregnant sort of surprise? If it was that sort of surprise, this video would be being conducted whilst I'm lying on the floor. We had a look at some cars recently. We had a look at some cars. I'm doing this bit on Monday. We looked at them yesterday, which was Sunday, just in case you didn't know what order the days of the week went in. But, went and had a look, because Sarah's learning to drive. We're sort of getting an idea as to what sort of car either she would like to eventually step up to, or if we can afford it, what could we go straight to and cut out the middle trading up, so to speak. And we went to a dealership. I won't say which one just at this point of the video. We went to a dealership and it was quite surprising. And where this dealership was, it's part of a chain. So it's part of a Marshall's group in Cambridge. And there's quite a few of them in a line. And we'll go through what was quite surprising and what this means from here. This is assuming this doesn't turn into death by Microsoft Teams. For the 8th time today. Jesus Christ. So, just briefly on my lunch at the moment. So, what was one of the big surprises? Well, one, I had never intended to trade the Swace in, or at least not unless I got an offer from the dealership I bought it from to make it worth my time. Now, I haven't traded the Swace or anything like that, but it was always a case of, nope, I am keeping that car. It's cost me a lot of money for me. I got a good deal on it. I mean, I got it for 23,000. You can't get it now for anything less than 28. So it's sort of even if I wanted to replace it and things, it's just like I'm out $5,000 automatically, just cause. But it sort of made me think maybe I might want to consider trading the Swace at some point, or at least maybe more open to doing so. What it has also done to me, and I had to get Sarah's opinion on this when I was talking to her about it yesterday. I never thought that I'd made a mistake in buying the Swace, because when I traded the Baleno, I was losing money at every other dealership I went to, particularly Skoda. They were offering me about £2,000 less than everywhere else. I had that Skoda, I had that at Subaru. I even had it with We Buy Any Car if I thought, well, let's just sell it flat out and go that way. And I even lost money at the Suzuki dealer, but I lost only about £200 or £300. So, I sort of had to stay Suzuki based on where I was with my finance at the time. I would say the only thing I've sometimes sort of felt maybe at fault for with it is when I have to get people in the back, on the back seat. With how I have my seat, there's not an awful lot of room behind me, and Sarah's preference is to have the passenger seat quite a long way back. Now, she does sometimes move it forwards, but it's also not the greatest of things when it is forwards, because it's hard to, you sat there, it's hard to do your left observation, because there's someone suddenly there. They almost have to do the observation for you. And it's not a trust thing or a don't trust, distrust. It's more a case of, yes, but if I've made a cock up, I know I've made the cock up, not, well, did you not see them then? Did I trust you? Did I mishear you? And so on. The Swace is a really good piece of kit for the money I paid for it. And it's never felt like a mistake buying that car. Never. The only mistake looking back that I've done was either buying the original Baleno or trading it in when I did, rather than just keeping it and tidying its finance off and things. That's the only mistake, if there is one. But it has made me revisit the question of, was it a mistake? Then again, as Sarah said to me the other day, it's like, it's all very well, yeah, you could sit there and say it's a mistake, but the cars we looked at weren't on the market, as in the current versions of them weren't on the market when I looked. And I also had, at the time, I was a little time pressured with buying the Swace because they were about to put the prices up on it. It's made me doubt myself. That's the surprise, I suppose. I was always pretty sure, sort of maybe 90% sure that I'm going to keep it. That's dropped to about 70% that I'm going to keep it. Not really an awful lot to say on the subject on that one. But it is one of the very surprising things about looking at all the dealers that we looked at. It really has changed my... That's including another Suzuki dealer. It's really made me question whether I am going to keep that car. It's undone what I thought was quite a firm conviction, is probably the best way to put it. Anyway, looking at that time, it is back to time to work. Time to go back to work. Well, actually, no, it's not quite time. I need to make a brew first. Not a beer, unfortunately. Time for a cup of tea. One of my trainers when I was in the police used to always say, we're going to have a cup, and now it's time for a cup of tea and a wee break. Which always, I always found it amusing, because he was a nice guy, but one of the people I was training with, she could not stand when he said that. I think we could never work out whether it was just how casually he said it, or whether it was the wee part. So just to catch her out one day, we're going to go for a cup of wee and a tea break. And it kind of broke her for the afternoon, which was quite amusing. And that sort of amusement will get me through the rest of today. So it is now the end of my work day. I appreciate this is now a little off-centre and things, and colour might not be right. I'm still working things out. You might also possibly see a black cable trailing along. That is the microphone, and I'm still trying to work out the best setup for it. So I will try and compensate for it in the edit if I can, but I can't necessarily promise that it will work accordingly. More important that everything syncs up. Just had a warning flash up saying that the video may well be lagging, so I apologise if this goes out of sync again. I probably just need to get I need a better PC, and they're bloody expensive to buy and build anyway at the moment. But anyway, so at the moment, as I mentioned, Sarah is learning to drive. We would like her to get the car she wants as soon as is possible, rather than step up from one to one to one to one and so on. So if you want a Ford Cougar, for example, you would start off with a Mondeo. That's bloody lucky, isn't it? Start off with a Fiesta, maybe go up to a Focus, and then maybe up to the Cougar. Using that sort of, you start smaller, work your way up. Or if you want a BMW 5 Series, you might go 1, 3, 5. If you want a 3 Series, you might go 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 3. There's a logical pattern to it, and we realise it's a lot to potentially do, depending because of the sort of vehicles we're looking at. If you hear sort of a ringing noise, both cats have got bells on the collar, so I don't know how that's going to sound. So potentially you might see them. Sarah's personal favourite choice of car is something that's SUV style. Now, you know me, and you know Velocity Kinetic's stance on SUVs. Then we're not a massive fan, because you don't get very much more than you would in a conventional saloon or an estate. And actually, whilst some people might go on about an SUV having more load capacity, the load capacity is vertical, not horizontal. So you might go to IKEA and want to buy a wardrobe, you'll probably more likely get it into the back of an estate than you will an average sized SUV. But nonetheless, Sarah's personal choice is an SUV. More specifically, it's a Land Rover, which is a little bit more tolerable from my point, because Land Rovers, they're not really, to a point, SUVs, as in they're proper engineered off-roaders. Whilst they might now be a little bit more for show, they've been engineered from the ground up to be able to go off-road. Her choices, what she liked the look of driving around, was the Range Rover Evoque and the Landrover Discovery Sport. One of my colleagues used to have one, the Range Rover Evoque that is, and personally I didn't really care for it. And the other one I've been in is a Land Rover Discovery Sport, which is what's replaced the Freelander a few years ago. The Evoque was a very nice car. Went into the showroom, Marshall's Land Rover in Cambridge. Whilst there might have been a dealer nearer, my car needed a run. It spends most of its time on the driveway these days, so needed. Sat in the Evoque, was surprised at how small it was inside. Granted, actually, when you take into consideration, it's not got the biggest floor plan, especially when you floor plan. It doesn't take up the biggest amount of space on the floor, that as much space as you would think. Not the biggest of boots on it at all. So that was a surprise, but not the surprise I was leading with. Then I sat in a Discovery Sport. I don't remember ever sitting in a car, and this is including the Swace, and this is including the Belenos, the S-Cross, Ford Fiesta, and a Ford Cougar as well. Quite a few different cars I've looked at and things over time, and the Skodas. That prompted me to change the Baleno way back when. I don't recall ever sitting in a car and feeling so immediately comfortable. I wasn't overly happy with the forward view, as in, I think that's something I would just have to get used to. But as in my seating position, I mean, whoever last sat in it was pretty close size, shape, choice of position to me. The steering wheel felt nice, the seat felt comfortable. In my driving position, I could get in the back with room to spare. There wasn't as much room to spare in an Evoque. The boot was quite impressive on the Discovery Sport. I mean, again, probably better in a estate vehicle than or even a saloon maybe, than in the Land Rover, but it was very impressive. Very impressive. Which is what surprised me. But like I said, the biggest surprise for me is how much I liked it. And it's sort of enough for me to go, if I ever do decide to get rid of the Swace, if things haven't lined up for Sarah to get one, I will give it a very serious consideration. Now, this doesn't mean I've changed my stance on SUVs at all, because there was a Ford dealership further down. I sat in a Ford Cougar. This is the newer shape one, not one the same shape as my dad's, because his is the previous one, but his was a Vignale. Is a Vignale, should I say? Apparently that's how you pronounce that word. I always thought it was Vignale, but apparently it's Vignale. I sat in a Cougar. I did not like it. The seat didn't feel right. I mean, some might say, starting off in the Land Rover, the arguably quite, well, it is a very expensive car, but starting off with a very good quality vehicle and then going down to a Ford, I quotation mark that, because Fords are still very, very good cars, just as in, compared to something that's a lot more high-end, the Cougar is a bit common. The Cougar was not, I didn't feel at home in it. It sort of felt, when I sat in it, it felt very much like all the parts had been stolen out different parts bins. Sarah was happier with the Cougar, not happier than the Land Rover, but she was happier with the Cougar than I was. We then tried a Puma. Puma felt nicer to sit in the driver's seat. Now, in the Cougar, what I've made sure I've done with all the cars we looked at that were open and we could go and have a look at and sit in, is I made sure that if the seat was more or less where I would sit it, could I then get in the back? So, because I'm not super tall, but I'm not exactly short, probably average to high end of average, but I've also got bulk to try and get in as well. I've made a point to try and get in, because also I never did that with the Swace. If I'd done that with the Swace, I might have thought twice about it, or had more second thoughts, reservations, because I did in the Baleno. I got in the back of the Baleno, and that was alright. When in the back of the Ford Cougar, I could have the seat in my driving position and get in quite comfortably. That's fine. In the Puma, that was nearly a completely different story. And then when I just sort of sat up to just adjust myself, as in this jumper had sort of rolled up a bit inside my body warmer, so just trying to straighten myself out, I hit the roof and I thought, oh, I'm just maybe sat a little off centre, maybe I've just hit, just above the door. No, I'd hit the vertical space, just sitting up a little bit, and we're probably talking about that sort of amount that I'm sort of moving. I've just moved. We're not talking an awful lot. And then the other thing that surprised me. Now, I appreciate it's quite a weird circumstance, as in it's a weird scenario to think of, but the thought crossed my mind. With where I was and where the doors and everything started to curve in, where the side impact cushion is, it's practically resting on my head with how I'd sit in the back of the Puma. So if something ever happened that required the airbags to deploy, boom, I'm getting an unpleasant handshake off an airbag. And then when we opened up the boot on the Puma, I know it's a small car, and I've been spoilt by cars with big boots, as in the Baleno was surprisingly big, my dad having big Volvos for years and having two Ford Cougars, so I've been used to very big cars. But the boot on the Puma, what a waste. What a waste. There's got to be a better way to do it. We then walked round to the EcoSport, because I said to her, well, whilst we're here, we might as well. She looked at the boot, flat no, we didn't look at it any further. Looked at the Ford Focus, actually the Ford Focus, the one I was happiest with there, even over the Fiesta. But the Ford dealership did have a used Ford Cougar that's nearly identical to my dad. Vignale, same colours, same wheels. The only difference is that one was a manual and his is an automatic. It was for £21,000, which for Vignale was pretty good, but it might have had so many miles on it, I don't know. So I suppose you could say we went from the nice surprise at Landrover, sort of a, holy crap, this is really good, maybe on the harder end of attainable dream, but it is an attainable dream car. Ford was a bit of a disappointment. I was expecting more from Ford. Next to Ford was Peugeot. Now, we looked at Peugeot because where we live in Bury St Edmunds, there is a Peugeot dealership here, and we thought, might as well have a look. Sarah's dad's got a Peugeot. I think this is a 207 or a 307 station wagon. It's an alright car, not my choice. I did briefly learn to drive in a 207 and I hated it. It's sort of why I've always never looked at a Peugeot since. Which might seem odd because I'm open to Renault. I'm not against any sort of French car at all. I'm always open to a Renault. But it seems I've been needlessly shrugging Peugeot, which was a surprise. Sat in a 308. The steering wheel is horrible. As an immediate first impression. Not having driven it or tried to live with it. Just as an immediate first impression, it is horrible. It feels too small and it's a weird shape. However, if you haven't gotten used to it by the end of a test drive, then just don't buy it. You're never going to get used to it. That's the long and the short of it. The boot was quite big on the 308, bigger than I was expecting. The seat was a lot more comfortable. The interior room was a bit more comfortable. Sarah didn't want one because the dashboard is all weird, and I have to agree, it is weird. One thing in Peugeot's favour, though, unlike the Land Rover, which is all touchscreen if you're buying a new one, that is the Peugeot, it's not quite toggle switches. I'll call them a toggle button because they're sort of bigger and raised, looking like a toggle switch, but it's just a button you can press quite firmly with your finger, I suppose is the best way to put it. A tap button rather than a push button may be the best way to describe them. We looked then, the car next to was a 3008. Now Sarah didn't mind that. It sort of met her criteria of being SUV. It did still have the weirdly small steering wheel, but again, not anything we can't get used to. But the 3008 was quite surprising. Very big boot. Very comfortable. The biggest surprise for me at Peugeot, and I'm going to give it some serious consideration, this is sort of what's triggered maybe I might replace the Swace, is I then sat in a 508. Now, I like big saloons, I love big estates. I don't know what it is. For me, the appeal in a big estate is it's just, you don't have to have a big family, you don't have to have dogs, cats, be a cyclist, as in mountain bike or anything like that. They're just brilliant ways of getting around with a lot of stuff very comfortably, and depending on the manufacturer, they're maybe very good drivers as well. So I had a look in the boot of the 508, because I was like, it was very long and it's very low, and I was like, surely something's got to have given. So, for example, this is what's made me think about, as I was saying, has made me think about the Swace. The Swace, I think, has sacrificed rear leg room to give a bigger boot, which is not illogical, but I think I would have rathered an ever so slightly smaller boot to have a little bit more rear leg room, I think. But the 508 boot was enormous. I was like, okay, so they've got to compromise somewhere else then. So I sat in the front. Now, I will say, maybe it's because the seat was not where I would put it, so it maybe felt more exaggerated than it would. But the door sills felt very high, as in it felt like a real to get your leg in. But the seat was very comfortable, maybe a bit on the narrow side for my frame, but maybe it's one of those things, actually, it's just because the seat's tight. Once it's broken in, it would actually open out a little bit for you. The steering wheel felt nicer in that. The paddles because it's an automatic with paddles, the paddle shift felt very nice, as in just the controllers felt nice. Again, it was those tap buttons rather than the push buttons. The interior space was lovely. Again, once I sort of slid the seat more into my position, I could get in the back quite comfortably, and it wasn't the same noticeable up and over with the leg. It was a very surprising car. I will have to take one for a test drive. When that Swace is due for its MOT, assuming the 508 is still being made and still has the good reviews it has, I'm going to take one for a test drive, because it's one of those things. It's like, okay, so you've got a good boot, you've got good feeling controls, good feeling it. They've got to compromise somewhere. Maybe they've compromised the driving experience. Who knows? Maybe it might have the worst automatic gearbox on it ever. I don't know. But I'm going to have to drive one. That was the biggest surprise of the lot at Marshall. Then after Peugeot, there was a Suzuki dealership that was, I think they split it between where the Glyn Hopkins dealer is and where there is a Fiat and MG dealership around the corner. I think it's split people, split owners, managers, salespeople, whatever you want to call it. So they weren't open, so we didn't look inside a new S-Cross. We actually gone to see if we could look at an A-Cross. More because the dealership where I get my cars from, I don't think I'd be allowed to. It's wrong to say don't be allowed, because like, well, they're not going to pressure you into buying something you don't want. But the fact I've bought from them before, I sort of didn't want to look at one without feeling like they're going to expect a sale. There was no A-Cross there. We couldn't even look at an outside of one, so not possible. And there was one more dealer down the other end, so we sort of started at Land Rover, worked up, and then we went to my favourite at the end, Volvo. They didn't have very many Volvos there in the showroom. Now, I appreciate compromising on size in the showroom, they can't have every model, but they did have a Polestar 2, which is interesting to look at. But I didn't look at it because I haven't got Polestar 2 money. Because if I did, I'd have just bought the Peugeot. Or if I had Polestar 2 money, I'd have just bought the Land Rover. Sarah's preference would be an XC40 or an XC60. My preference would be a V60 or an S60 or a V40, because ultimately where we live, whilst it is a little bit rural and something big and bulky like an SUV would be useful sometimes, where she lives to work for where we work is 3.5-4 miles. It's not, she doesn't need anything really big. hence why maybe the V40. The XC40 was alright, couldn't look in the boot properly, which is a pain, because they're all electronic tailgates, which is like, I get it, but why can't I have one where I can just open it? Seats were okay, don't smell quite this. The new Volvos just don't quite smell like they used to. They used to be nothing like the smell of a new Volvo. Now it's sort of all much of a muchness, unless I've just grown up, which is also possible. We then looked at an XC60, which she also quite liked. But before we went in the building, we had a look at their used cars as well, just to see what they had, because I know my dad's had a few really good second-hand Volvo buys, and also to get an idea of, like, look, we're not going to be able to afford one of those new, unless some reason we come into some money somehow that means we can. But even she said if we came to that sort of money, she'd probably rather we take the Landrover over a Volvo. I saw a really good V60 that if I hadn't replaced my Baleno when I did, I probably would have been very tempted by. But then further down, I started looking at V40s, because I thought, ultimately we just need if you're being really penny pinching, logical, if you're being cruel, clinical, concise, we don't need anything bigger than a V40 as long as I've got a Swace. And if she did buy a Land Rover, I don't need anything bigger than a V40 after the Swace has had its suitable lifespan. There was a really good V40 on a 68 plate it's only got 13,000 miles on it. Only 13,000. It's got a reversing camera, it's got parking sensors. That was a very big surprise. This is one of the other big surprises from the day, because we started when we were driving home, we were seriously like starting to work out, could we afford that Volvo? So it's ready for when she passes her test. A really nice car to drive. And when I got home, I did an insurance quote. I took a picture of the car, did an insurance quote on it when I got home. Before we go, why do you take a picture of the car? It's to get the number plate. So then when I put it into the database to do a quote, they've got all the right details for it, and I'm not guessing anything that it's got or hasn't got on it. I'm not quite as up on the Volvo range as I used to be, as in engine outputs and spec levels and so on. And for insurance, I could insure it for £40 a month. I'm still umming and ahhing as to whether or not to arrange to go and have another look at it, because I feel like that's a mistype of the number of the mileage on it. If you're watching and if you're like, well, he's just starting to ramble things, that's how surprised I am by it and how ummed and ahed I am over it. It sort of it's thrown a spanner into my brain works. I just don't know what to do. But we also can't I'm not sure we can afford the finance. We've got some money spare that could act as a good deposit, but you pay more interest on a used car. And what is frustrating is it's about 17 grand, this V40. But I remember, I'm going to sound like a boomer. I'm going to sound like, oh, where's my teeth? Oh, the war. But I remember a time when you could buy a V40 for 17,000 brand new with a winter pack on it. That was actually not that long ago in my lifetime. I'm 32 now. You could do that when I was 26, 27, and when I was 25, because I nearly got a V40 as my first car. And then the last thing we did after that, we drove home, but we stopped at BMW in Bury, because when I looked at that Swace, there was a BMW 3 Series estate at the BMW dealership in town that I nearly went and looked at. And ultimately, when I went to Suzuki, the guy said, look, I've given you more because it's a Suzuki. When he was quoting me trading prices on the Baleno, I've given you more because it's one of our own. So I didn't really pursue it any further, and I could have had the Swace. I think I had the Swace less than 2 weeks later. No lead-in time, and so on. Plus it's 23 grand at the time. I think I might have made the right decision, although arguably having replaced the windscreen, the front bumper, and the front tyres on that Swace, maybe it's not been quite as money pit free as we want. But anyway, so we went and looked at BMW. She quite liked the 3 Series, because I had a 320i there. Had a look at a 1 Series, which again she didn't mind. There was a 2 Series Active Tourer. Now this the BMW visit served dual purpose, as kind of did the Land Rover dealership in some ways. Because remember last year I did that video about looking at cars for my dad and things. He's still umming about downsizing, which I think he needs to do sooner rather than later. Obviously I don't know their financial position, that's just I think they need to do it. But I thought I'd have a look, because I never actually looked physically at a BMW when I was recommending him to go get one. I'd just seen them around the active tourer and said, I think that's the one you need to look at. Having looked at one in person, it has set my mind that that is the car that he should go for, and that is my ultimate recommendation for him. Is scrap your heated windscreen. You're not really going to get that anywhere outside of Ford, or at least not without paying a massive premium or being back in a vehicle that's so big, that's as big as your Cougar, that you've not gained anything. It can take a wheelchair. It's got the electric tailgate. The seats look comfortable. Also had a look at an X2, and the X2 was also the same thing. Fantastic choice. That would be my second choice for him. My third choice would be a Toyota CHR, but I need to check a couple of things on that just to make completely sure. But what was a surprise is my dad ultimately, he nearly bought an X1. When he bought the Ford, he nearly bought the X1. But apparently the BMW salesman said there was a delivery fee of £1,500, which is what stopped the sale dead in its tracks. I spoke to the guy there and said, look, my dad nearly bought one. I did lie about how long ago it was, as in I said it was a little bit longer, just so people don't connect the dots and someone start phoning my dad unnecessarily. The salesman, what was really nice to see was he was like, that's rubbish. Whoever told him that was talking absolute rubbish. It was really nice to see someone openly say no. He's like, well, who was it? Who was it? I was like, I don't know. I'm just relaying information I got from my dad. So if nothing else, again, even if I did choose to go Land Rover or to the Peugeot, that BMW dealer has just that one man. It's amazing. One person in the dealership can sink or swim your opinion of whether or not you want that. And I've always had great experience from Suzuki dealers. That's sort of why I've always kept driving them, never really looked anywhere else. I had a bad experience at Skoda because they messed up the finance numbers. It's why I haven't gone back to Skoda for anything as of yet. Really interesting, but that experience with BMW has made me go, right, I'm going to go have a look at them if and when the time is time for me to replace, if Sarah hasn't chosen to go BMW for herself. And then after that we came home. To summarise this video, the main surprises were I'm more open to trading the Swace than I thought I was. I actually quite like the Landrover Discovery Sport sitting inside it. Really like the Peugeot 508. Very surprised by it. Saw a very good value Volvo that I might go and see if we can look at it again. And had a redeeming experience at BMW. And like I said at the top of the video, it might seem weird to be looking at trading in for or trying to buy a car for when Sarah passes a test, or when she passes a test. That's very big and maybe more than what we need. But like I said, it's just to avoid trading cars a lot. The other thing is, because we're trying to start a family, you don't want to buy a little car. I was going to say Ford Fiesta, but that seems harsh just to it sounds like I'm being harsh towards the Ford Fiesta. But it seems silly to buy a little city car that you then may struggle with when there are children around. Now I know a lot of people do cope or manage with that, and that's great. Some people can't. And I don't really want us to be in a situation where it becomes a case of we can't manage with this if for some reason the Swace was just not available. I wouldn't want it to be a case of we can't manage with this and then have to trade up unnecessarily. So for instance, that's why the smallest thing I would look at is a Ford Focus. But because Sarah's family live in Newcastle and she's got friends up there as well, we need something that is comfortable and capable at doing a dual carriageway run for that long, a motorway run. From here to Newcastle with no stops, allowing for traffic, is about 5 hours. And as much as I loved my Baleno, that got tiring on a drive to and from. As much as I liked my little red Swift, that was a lot for that car to to do, and it was apparent it was not really built to do that. Having done it a few times in the Swace, it's apparent that that is more where that Swace is at home. I suppose I better wrap this up really, because otherwise, based on the recording numbers so far, 16, 20 plus 10, this is about 46, 48 minutes of raw footage before I cut it down. Quite a surprise, looking around a lot of places. And we've got more places we want to look at. We want to look at Subaru, we want to look at Toyota, and also take my dad to see if the CHR is what he wants. We've got Hyundai to look at. We've got a lot of looking to do, and there may be another video of surprise at some point. But take care of yourselves. The living with a Swace, like a year of Swace, it's now going to be like 18 months of a Swace by the time it's all said and done. That is on the way. I have seen a GoPro type camera that I want to get. I just need to speak to Sarah to make sure she hasn't already got something like that lined up for me for a birthday or anniversary present, because I'm not making that mistake. But hopefully that video will not be too far behind. But anyway, like I said, look after yourselves, drive safe, and we'll see you next time.